Hello, good evening, welcome. I am Samuel Trapp. You are listening to International Flavor. We are here tonight with a lot of information for you. I have entitled this show, as you see on the Trump's 10-day ultimatum, Bluff, Bluster, or BRICS Backfire. And we're going to go into this fairly deeply. I'm going to talk about it for a while. I've put a lot of thought into this week, and it's going to be a bit of a long-winded show. Not unusual for me, but it does. So I want to make sure that we get to everything. But before we get there, I want to let you know that you can always listen to my shows pre-recorded, uh, or those that I follow up and put on a podcast at internationalflavor.com. I have a Russian version that's on my YouTube channel. So you go to YouTube and the channel is at Samuel Trapp. And Trap is TRAPP, two P's, like mousetrap, but two P's is how I always say it to invite people along. If I've not tried the call-in function on this, but if you're listening through Podbean, you should be able to click on a link, and that will allow you to have a phone call with me live. You can join in, ask me a question or two, should you feel the urge. And like I said, I've prepped this show for a little bit over the last couple of days because I've really put quite a bit of thought into it and done some research. I'll share the links with you that I have. I'll try to make sure and reference them as we go through. Most of what I have is, surprisingly for me, from Western sources. And I did want to alert you to one of the problems that you have when you're seeking out Western sources is trying to find something that is not so twisted to one side or the other. Everybody knows that listens to me at all that I have a very a twisted view of American news and American politics and American point of view of what they give us in the public sphere, because the public is getting screwed here. You don't get any good information unless you happen to listen to a guy like me once in a while, or my compatriots on my live radio program, which is at damradio.com/live. I do my international flavor show, from Sunday through uh, Thursday, 9 p.m. to 10:30, and then I record them, of course, and I upload them onto my international flavor site, so they're all there. Well, Damn Radio has a number of other good shows with excellent talk and commentary, and so I encourage you to go out and listen to it if you get any opportunity to do so. I would appreciate it if you did that for my show or for anyone else's show that's on our program. You can go out and listen to damradio.com/live. You can listen to the show anytime, or to the music that they provide anytime. You can also go to damradio.com/schedule to get the schedule of the other programs. Well, as I told you, my show tonight is Donald Trump's 10-day ultimatum. Is it bluff? Is it bluster? Will it backfire? Last week, Donald Trump shortened his deadline for Russia to, in his words, cease its war in Ukraine. And he cut it from the initial 50 days he blustered about to down to 10 or 12 days. Nobody knew how much. whether it's 10 days or 12, we don't know. The ultimatum carries a pretty hefty implications. Trump is threatening the so-called punishing sanctions, right? And 100% tariffs, not only on Russia, but many nations that trade with Russia if Moscow fails to make peace by the new deadline. That's according to AP News. The sharp reduction in this time frame gives us some pressing questions, right? What prompted Trump's urgency? Why is it important to do? What's wrong with the 50 days that he put in? I always wondered about how arbitrary was 50 in the first place. How do battlefield realities, particularly the fighting around Pokrovsk, factor into his calculations? What are officials and observers from all sides saying? So, here in this program, I'm going to go into official explanations by the government of the United States. I'm going to go into the war developments that are perhaps pushing this change. I'm going to go into reactions from Russian and Ukrainian leaders. I'm going to talk about insights from analysts and military bloggers and the influence of Trump's advisors, economic consequences, very important to me because I truly believe that this will cause some issues and a hefty risk to the US dollar. And I'm not sure we can afford that right now. And then there's also, I'm even going to throw in some fringe theories that people have been talking about all of this, which are coming out on social media or fringe elements of talk shows. But everything that I provide you is going to be properly sourced. It's going to provide a real picture of why this ultimatum was slashed to 50 days and what I think will occur because of that slash. So Trump's stance on ending the Ukraine war, he hasn't really explained all that well, but his stance on the Ukraine war has gone back and forth since he took office for the second term. Initially, he said that of course, everybody knows he was very confident that he could end the war swiftly. He boasted he could do it on day one of his presidency, and he never did. Then he got progressively, I don't know what, explanatory about it, saying, by mid-July, by 2 weeks ago, saying, that with the war grinding on, this is when he set his 50-day deadline. And that would have given the funny part to me is that he's only focusing on Putin right now and not on Zelensky, but he's giving Putin the deadline of early September to have a Russia-Ukraine peace deal. He wants a deal. And what is this? How are you going to make a deal with only one party? I have that question. And he's vowing very severe 100% secondary tariffs on Russian goods and countries trading with Russia if no deal is forthcoming. A little bit extreme, okay? Um, but after 2 weeks after he announced that, he shortened the window by 25 days, dropped it down on July 28th. During meetings in Europe, he announced a new ultimatum, giving Moscow only 10 or 12 days from that date to stop the killing in Ukraine. Okay, well, question again, what's Ukraine doing? They're killing. What deals have they attempted to make? None. It's well, officially Trump says that he's frustrated because of the lack of progress and because of bloodshed. He said there's no, why jump from 50 days down to 10? He says, well, there's no reason in waiting because we don't see any progress being made, as what he told reporters. And he expressed that he was disappointed in Putin for talking about peace but continuing to bomb Ukrainian cities. He was in Scotland with a Prime Minister of the UK, Keir Starmer, and he stressed that he was not interested in talking anymore to Putin. Now, I find this very interesting because I believe he won't talk to Putin because Putin will convince him to say something else because Donald Trump, who I like, by the way, he just seems to flow with the breeze. Whoever he talks to last, that person is who has his fresh thoughts, and he changes his mind like a lot of people change their underwear. And so it's crazy. Now he's hooked on this. Too many people are dying, and so now it's urgency. Too many people have been dying for a long time. He warned, so I don't really trust his the reason he's giving for saying it. That, well, it's because no progress is being made. Well, doesn't progress require both sides to make progress? That's what I keep asking. And we're not talking about progress on the Zelensky side. We're only talking about progress has to come from Putin. Nonsense, right? But Trump warns that if Russia doesn't show any real movement toward peace by the end of his new deadline, 10, 12 days, U.S. is going to impose the sanctions and tariffs immediately. And he says, if you know what the answer is going to be, why do I have to wait? Well, because you said you were going to, you give 50 days. This guy, like I said, he just keeps on changing his mind. And I'm not a Trump detractor, enemy, anything like that. I'm not that guy. I just, I enjoy him as president. I think it's always entertaining, but let's see. He said he didn't want to put sanctions or tariffs on Russia because he has an affection for the Russian people, but he will if he's forced. He said Putin has got to make a deal because too many people are dying. Why is it only Putin? I never did understand that why it's only Putin. His new hardline was underscored by some direct quotes, and I'll give them to you. There's quite a few of them. I wanted to be generous, but just we don't see any progress. I'm going to make a new deadline of 10 to 12 days from today. He just flies by the seat of his pants. He also admitted a reluctance to resolve, uh, you know, or to input sanctions, but he's resolved. He's going to keep that up. He says, I love the Russian people and I don't want to do that to Russia, but no more lives should be lost. Well, you know, dump Ukraine, quit funding their war machine, and you'll get the same result, Herr Trump. You'll get the exact same thing if you just stop funding it, right? Turn it back over to Europe. Let them handle it. It's not our problem. It is not. So, the official U.S. explanation for the truncated ultimatum is his impatience with Putin's alleged stalling and the moral imperative to halt a worsening war. The administration emphasizes that Putin is showing bad faith. I don't agree with that, and I don't see that at all. He's offering assurances in conversations, but then he continues to bombard Ukraine. Well, and they say civilians, they throw that in there despite talking about peace. Well, when is Ukraine going to capitulate? When is Ukraine going to recognize the realities of life? That the United States, that NATO, that none of these other people are going to ride in on a white horse and save them by fighting for them. They've lost all of an entire generation of men, and they're losing. Why is Russia going? I mean, in all seriousness, Trump, why are they going to capitulate just because you say so? I don't understand who and American presidents are always this way, but the world is changing, friends and neighbors. It really is. And this article or this it's an article I wrote. Hell, I wrote a good long one, but this program, you're gonna see that when you listen through here. And he just keeps reiterating, we don't see any progress and we don't see any reason in waiting. Okay. Now I don't believe this as the reason, but the shift aligns with Trump's desire because he wants to be seen as an international peacemaker. And he wanted to call that his proudest legacy, right? Well, remember, we have Netanyahu nominating him for the Nobel Peace Prize because he's I don't know what. He goes and bombs Iran, and then Trump settles that conflict in no time at all by helping bomb and then saying, "Oh no, we've made an agreement and it's over." Um, I don't know how you call that a proud legacy, but they want to say he's the peacemaker, and he can't be the peacemaker if he can't resolve Ukraine. But if he continues to listen to only one side, you're not going to resolve it anyway. So he says he's frustrated with Putin and wants to force Putin to take a tougher, uh, you know, wants to put a tougher position on Putin to force him to fall back. Nobody's going to force Putin to do anything. It's it's not going to happen. If you think that, you don't understand Russians, and you sure as hell don't understand Vladimir Putin. Where are you getting these so-called experts? These experts are still living in the 80s, unfortunately. So let's talk about what I believe to be the real reasons for this change in position. Okay. The first one, reason number one, Ukraine is losing. Okay. Ukraine is losing this war, and they have been losing for a year and a half. They had their, or longer, they had their counteroffensive that touted as, oh, geez, we're going to fix everything. That showed a little bit of progress, but nothing happened. That they lost all of that. The idiotic move into Kursk was just foolish. How in the world your military leaders think that is a good idea? It's just not. And so I don't know. Trump, you can't separate the urgency of Trump from the fact that the battlefield realities, Ukraine is losing. So I believe Trump knows uh, that Putin knows that Russia is winning, and so Trump has to do something because he's losing. That's reason number one. Ukraine is losing, so he has to back off of his 50 days and go down to 10. Right? Uh, Battlefield realities in Ukraine. Intensifying combat, especially around Pokrovsk in the last couple of weeks in Donetsk Oblast. It's they're losing, no doubt. The Ukrainians are losing, and they're losing badly. And so I know that Trump is not an idiot. He knows this. And so Pokrovsk and its area around it are the most active area on the front. And Russia had put in approximately 111, 110, 115,000 troops there and have been pushing on a major offensive for that. And so, but by late July, Russia is on the very outskirts of Pokrovsk, and they've actually gained some in the last week, and they're actually in the town. They've taken over Chasiv Yar. They all of the bloggers. I watch a lot of Telegram in Russian, and you don't have to believe it all, but I'm telling you, there are guys on the battlefield, and we'll get into some of the things that they talk about, that are on the Russian side. So if you're believing only the American side, the only thing you get in America is that Ukrainians are winning. They still want to believe that Ukrainians are winning. Only an idiot would believe that Ukraine is winning. They are not. And if you watch the battle lines every single day, Russia is gaining another kilometer or 2 kilometers, 10 kilometers, depending on where you are. It's a 1,200-kilometer front. It's huge. And so it's coming and curving all the way around, and Russia is winning, no doubt. So, but Pokrovsk is a very bad loss if Ukraine loses it, okay? Pokrovsk is a very strategic spot. They call it the gateway to Donetsk. It's on a key road, key rail, several crossroads right there, very big for supply to other areas like Chasiv Yar, Konstantinovka, and it's also right next to Ukraine's only coking coal mine. the only one that they have, and they're about to lose it. They already lost a huge chunk of their uranium, and it's really not working for them. And so, listen, Pokrovsk had a very sizable population pre-war, 60,000 plus or minus, most of them evacuated. And if Russia captures Pokrovsk, it is going to pave the way and they're going to capture Pokrovsk, by the way. They already got a lot of it, and this will lead the way for them to block the Ukrainians from taking or from keeping Kramatorsk, Slavyansk, and it will disrupt the logistics. Russians will envelop Ukraine's rest of their strongholds in Donetsk. So, in broader terms, success at Pokrovsk will open approaches to the Dnipropetrovsk region in the west, and it will expand the war's footprint for Russia even more than it already is. So the Ukrainians are losing. Trump knows this. So reason number one for reducing the 50 days down to 10 is they're trying to save Pokrovsk, and they're not going to, but I think it'll be gone even in the 10 days. But even through the spring of 2025, Ukraine was barely holding the line of Pokrovsk, and they put several brigades in there. They put lots of approach mines and fortifications, and they used tons of drones to try to beat up and harass on the Russian units. And it slowed the Russians a little bit, but it has not stopped them. They've just keep on coming. And Russia is going to keep on coming. They've said what the goals are. Russia will meet those goals. Okay. Russia's very much adapted. They have, they're what do they call them? The wire guided, the fiber optic drones that they have. They're immune to jamming. So when I served in the military, I was on a collection and jamming crew. So I would listen to when I was in the American Army. You listen to Russian over the radio, and I'm supposed to be able to jam. So first you intercept their communications, and then you jam those communications. And so collection and jamming was my job in the military, and so I understand this fairly well. And I don't with respect to new technologies like drones, but I get the concept for sure. And so for the Russians to introduce drones that are immune to jamming, and they have serious jamming operations on their own in the other direction, it's freaking awesome. And so for Russia, I mean, and not good for Ukraine at all. And so Russia can sit 25 kilometers behind the lines and send these fiber optic drones, and they've done it with great success this year. They are moving and advancing, and Ukraine cannot stop them. By May, Russia had seized the highway that links Pokrovsk to Konstantinovka, and they took one of the three supply lines to the city, and now they've covered a second one. So local officials warned by July that they, were unable to get food, and they had to get people out if they were still in Pokrovsk. They had to get out. So this past Monday, July the 28th, right when Trump was shortening his ultimatum, Pokrovsk was in very bad shape. They're surrounded on three sides. To the northwest, they got a way out, but all the rest of it, they're not leaving, right? And so Zelensky acknowledges that a small group of Russians had breached the city. Oh yeah, right. And then he said they were all destroyed, right? But the incursion shows that the time is not on Ukraine's side. Putin will not make any concessions unless he is forced to by Ukraine. So he can't be forced to because Ukraine can't win on the battlefield. I've been saying that for 3 years. And so have a lot of other people. I'm not alone, but this is my area of expertise, unfortunately, for a lot of people, because I went on the radio with some senator from the state of Missouri, and she was I shouldn't call people names. She was a she wasn't very knowledgeable. Let's put it like that. And so everybody had been denying the fact that there were any NATO bases in Ukraine, any military bases in Ukraine. We weren't expanding NATO into Ukraine. And so she's on the radio and I'm talking to her. I'm just having a question and answer period with her. And she goes, "Oh, I was in Ukraine. I've been on our military bases over there. We have military." I was like, "You realize you probably shouldn't be saying that, because we're saying we don't have any military bases. And here you are senator, or representative. I'm sorry, she's a representative, saying that we do have them. Nonsense. And so the fact that we did have them, and so I've been saying that since that time, and that was either right before or right after the 22nd of February of 2022. And so, you know, I don't know. I don't mean to make fun of people who are dying. I mean, these Ukrainians are dying. I want this war over too. I think it needs to be finished, but we can't only listen to one side. And unfortunately, that's what's happening right now. Um, Putin recognizes that, that he controls, of course, the battlefield. How does he not recognize it? He's sitting in the catbird seat. That's what he's doing. As the Atlantic Council put it, atlanticcouncil.org, in their own analysis, they said the Russian army is advancing at all points along the front lines while Ukraine is being worn down. Putin holds the battlefield initiative and can reasonably expect to prevail. That's absolutely true. And you know how long it took people to say that? They haven't said that. And in fact, people still aren't saying that. But finally, here we are, 3.5 years in, and somebody is finally, people are finally saying it, right? Russia is winning, period. Ukraine claims to that Russia has huge losses, but Ukraine is also the people. Zelensky comes over and says that since the war began, Ukraine has lost 46,000 soldiers. That's it. Then how does Russia return 6,000 of them less than a month ago dead? They returned 6,000 dead. They talked about another 3,000 here a couple of weeks ago. So Russia has 9,000, right? If you look at any graveyard from any Telegram channel, from any family member that has posted a unfortunate loss of a family member in this horror story, you will know that is a lie. All of the cemeteries in Ukraine are full. They can't find. There are reports coming from the Kiev, from Ukrainian news saying they don't have enough places to bury people. And if they had only lost 46,000, how come they need another 30,000 a month to meet their numbers, which is also public knowledge that they keep putting. Anyway, this battlefield picture is reason number one for Trump's reducing the 50 days down to 10, right? The U.S. led peace efforts that when they started with trying to get together, and the only goal that they came up with, the only goal, 30-day ceasefire. And Putin, Lavrov, Peskov, Medvedev, name it, any person. Zakharova, she's funny. You listen to her. The only people who talk about this, and they always say the same thing. If you want to resolve this war, we will listen, but we're not doing it for 30 days. The only reason to have a 30-day stop in hostilities is for you to regroup, you to dig new trenches, you to come up with a way to get more weapons, you to come up with a way to fill the holes in the front lines. And we as Russia are not going to do that because we are winning. If you want to resolve it, come to the table, let's sit down and resolve it. But it's going to have to be something pretty good because you always lie to us. You always have. Minsk Accords, Budapest agreements, all of it. Arms control treaties. I worked in arms control in the second half of my military career as an interpreter for the State Department for the Nuclear Threshold Test Ban Treaty, the INF Treaty, START 1, and I participated in these. We have backed off of those. We are not there. So it's I don't know, interesting stuff. The very night of Trump's 10-day ultimatum, Russia launched one of its largest aerial attacks of the war. So Russia's kicking the crap out of military targets. Maybe they're hitting some civilian too, but the Ukrainians have hit a lot of civilian targets inside of Russia, right? So it targeted 73 cities and villages across Ukraine on the 28th, right after Trump said 10 more days. President Zelensky, in response, wants very harsh, truly painful what? Sanctions on Moscow. He wants sanctions. Okay, we'll get into here in a little bit why these sanctions aren't going to work. They do not work, and we'll get into that. Okay, but here's what the old Z-Man said that after these attacks on the 28th by new Russian drones and missiles. This was done after a completely clear position was voiced by the United States. Okay, what does the United States have to do with it, by the way? That Russia must end this war and move to diplomacy. Okay, says Zelensky. And he welcomed Trump's updated, shorter deadline of 10 days. Well, my question is, where is Ukrainian diplomacy? Ukrainians are allowed to have these positions. We're not going to give up any of these four areas. And by the way, we still want the Crimea back. You know, those referendums you had, those were fake. Oh yeah. And the US has real referenda, right? we put in real referenda wherever we go. It's okay for the U.S. to have some kind of questionable referendum, but it is not okay if Russia does something similar. Right? That's not permitted. Russia's are truly fake and fake news according to the West, but ours are always noble and democratic. If you still have the illusion that democracy exists in Ukraine, you need your head examined. Okay, it does not, and that is not going to change. You know, Zelensky won't leave, and he won't have an election because he knows this to be true himself. So basically, as far as reason number one, okay, which is Ukraine is losing, um, this gives Trump a huge impetus to shorten that ultimatum because the longer the deadline, you know, this 50-day deadline, the more time the Russians have to press their offensive and the fact that they're winning along the front lines. His 50-day window, which would have gone into early September, like September 3rd or something like that, would definitely have allowed Russia to capture Pokrovsk. I think they'll still take it in the next 10 days, frankly. But by slashing it down to 10 days, Trump shows that he believes that he might be able to stop them from taking Pokrovsk, right? And as Trump said, why wait when each day brings no progress? But there is plenty of progress on the Russian side. The Russians are going, well, how do you say no progress? We're taking Pokrovsk and a lot of other places. They took Chasiv Yar. How long did Chasiv Yar sit out there? Crazy stuff, people. The Pokrovsk offensive, with Ukraine's fate in this region hanging in the balance, meant that Trump had to conclude that this timeline was good for shortening it up. Well, let's go on to reason number two. Okay, this is reactions from Moscow, reactions from war bloggers. I call it reason number two is political games, and the U.S. is full of political games, just like always. We're full of them, and these people are basically calling the U.S. on it. So Trump's ultimata, the original 50-day one and the new 10 to 12-day one, received pretty much, oh yeah, right, defiant and scornful reaction from Russia, from Russian leaders, and I don't want to call them pro-war people, but people who realize that they're in this war to win it, not to stop and let's do it all over again in 2 years. If you're going to stop and do it all over again in 2 years, you might as well stay in it because the will of the people, you have it now, but you may not have it 2 years from now. So the Kremlin's initial response to the 50-day demand, they rejected it out of hand already. And they insisted that Russia's going to continue the special military operation until it meets its own objectives. Sergei Rybakov, Rybkov on July 15 said, any attempts at demands, ultimatums, are completely unacceptable to us. And a lot of them feel that way. Frankly, I've been saying that forever. Why are ultimatums, why are positions that are set? If you remember, I did an episode on position based bargaining versus uh, interests of the parties. Position based is, well, no, I want to win. And the other one is, no, I want to win. Interest based bargaining is really the why. Why do you want to win? Well, Russia, I mean, if you don't understand how to mediate a settlement between people when all you got is two demands, I mean, imagine you're buying a car, for example, and you go to the used car lot, you want to buy a car, and you go, I got 5,000 for the car. And the guy goes, no, I need six for it. You go, no, I'll give you five. And he goes, no, I need six. And you go, I'll give you five, 5, 6, 5, 6, 5. That is not negotiation. But if the guy goes, listen, I need to give it to you for five because all I have is five. I don't have six. And the guy goes, well, listen, I can't give you this car, but I can give you this car for five, and it's got these things that are better and these things that are worse. That is interest-based bargaining. Position-based bargaining is just picking a number and sticking with it. So you don't think, so you can accuse Russia of that, and in part, you'd be accurate. They have listed from the very beginning what the goals of the SVO are, and they've stuck to them. They've never deviated. They've said the same thing for 4 years, 3.5 years, right? Ukraine, on the other hand, is losing. They're losing. They have some concrete demands. Give us back Crimea. No, we hold Crimea. One of Russia's positions is we want all the territories that we have. You need to recognize that they're ours. Recognize that there's changes on the battlefield. No, yes, no. Okay, well, it's never going to end then. The only way it ends is when Russia forces capitulation from Ukraine. And those days are coming, especially if the U.S. isn't willing to put NATO troops on the ground in Ukraine. And frankly, even if they do, I'm not so sure it would make any difference to change it. Okay. So the Russians have held quite strong to their positions. Okay. Rybakov reiterated Putin's line that Moscow prefers diplomacy, but if we cannot achieve our goals through that diplomacy, then the war is going to continue. And what he said was, his concrete response was, this is an unshakable position. They've said that forever. And in other words, Russia refuses to bend to any U.S. imposed timeline. They're not going to do it. Dmitry Peskov took a more cautious tone, and he's always a little bit more, I don't know what, reasonable when he talks. He usually doesn't get into war of words, right? And he said, well, that's a pretty serious threat that Trump is making, and we need time to analyze it with 50 days. When Trump switched down to 10, he said, well, Putin might respond if and when he feels it's necessary. But Putin has not responded at all. He hasn't said a word about it. I watched his interview with, he was near a cemetery with Lukashenko from Belarus yesterday, and I watched the interview. It was only like half an hour, 45 minutes, and they asked him a few questions about it, and he didn't really go there. They did talk about putting Oreshnik missiles in Belarus and said that that's going to happen by the end of the year, but they didn't talk about the sanctions and the tariffs that they're going to put secondarily against other BRICS nations. To force them to stop trading with Putin. So anyway, other Russian officials have been a little less reasonable or restrained. So I always like listening to the former president, Dmitry Medvedev, and he's the guy that's been fighting with Lindsey Graham and Trump on social media. And what he called it was a theatrical ultimatum. This is nonsense. And he said that Russia just doesn't care. When Trump shortened that deadline, he said something even worse. He said, look, each new ultimatum is a threat and a step towards war, not between Russia and Ukraine, but with Trump's own country. That's what he said. Now, people have finally admitted over the years that this war has never been about Ukraine. This war has always been about NATO, the U.S., EU, whatever you want to call it, Western hegemony, Western dictatorship, or what the rest of the world is going to think. Well, that's where you are. You've got it. So he Medvedev insinuated that Trump's actions were going to bring the U.S. closer to direct conflict with Russia, and people are talking about, in all seriousness, World War III. In an exchange on X, Medvedev, and Lindsey Graham called, and I don't like Lindsey Graham. I call Lindsey Graham Graham Cracker, and I think he's a nut, and he spends more time in Ukraine than he does in his own home state. And I think the guy never met a war he couldn't justify and couldn't figure out a way to profit from it himself, by selling weapons or force and stuff on people. And he's still living 25 years ago. He's still living as if the U.S. has the power to end this war the way he thinks they will. So this what is his name? Medvedev told Lindsey Graham, called him Gramps, and then told him to work on America first, because they never do. Military bloggers from Russia on Telegram are pretty much ridiculed Trump too. I told you about the official positions from the Kremlin and things like that, although Putin himself hasn't said a word. Lavrov's been fairly quiet about the ultimatum too. I think there are probably some activities going on in the shadows to attempt to resolve this. It'd be nice to get it done. There's a prominent blogger named German Kulikovsky. He calls himself Starsha Eddie. He said that good old Donald is a typical American salesman, not a politician. Nothing but lies and fiery speech, all to sell an uninformed average person a poor quality product. He advised Russia to hang up the phone on Trump's junk. And then he, made a couple of insults on top of that. A guy named Alexei Kargopoltsev, and he's on Telegram as Zapiski Veterana, which means writings of a veteran. He interpreted Trump's message pretty bluntly. And this, as he says, this is what Trump is saying, and I agree with him. Either do as I say, or I'll pressure you even harder with sanctions. He said that peace is impossible on such terms, and that Russia cannot accept what is being offered, and Ukraine will not agree to what Russia demands. So, just like me, these people are all saying, what is the point? To put more sanctions on? To let Lindsey Graham, oh, geez, we got bone-crushing sanctions for you, baby. There have been 18 packages of sanctions that haven't done a damn thing. And Russia is still there. You think you're going to stop them with another threat of sanctions and a tariff? It's not going to happen. So I don't know. I'd be happy to be wrong if it ended the war. But I don't think it's going to end. I don't think it's going to end the war. Number one, and I'm right. Number two. So, sorry about that. I just am. What he did suggest as well was that Ukraine should prepare for the complete destruction of its own male population, and Russia should prepare for a long and grueling war. That's unfortunate, but it's true. That came from the Kiev Independent. That's a Ukrainian newspaper, right? I listen to a channel fairly frequently called Dva Mayora, which means two majors, and they're on Telegram. At that channel says that Trump's ultimatum shows that he doesn't understand who he's dealing with. I agree with that. He doesn't understand. Lindsey Graham doesn't understand. The idiots in Washington they use as experts also don't understand. And so it would be nice if they did, but they don't. And the Dva Mayora said, nothing will be agreed to under pressure, they said. Why should Russia trust the U.S. given its own past cheating? And how do you not agree with that? The U.S. has cheated since I was in the military and I was a Russian interpreter for the INF Treaty, the Nuclear Threshold Test Ban Treaty, and START 1 and 2. We cheated. We left them under Trump in 2018-19, and we don't recognize them anymore. Non-proliferation, we make promises and do nothing about it. Israel, I don't mean to beat up on them, and they're not part of this, but they aren't even a member of non-proliferation, and that's okay. But if Iran isn't going to be a member of non-proliferation, that's the end of the freaking world. Why is it okay if? And I just want one standard for everyone, but we always create one for us, different rules for everybody else. Nonsense. There's another veteran blogger on the Russian side on Telegram. His name is Boris Rozhin, and his name is Colonel Kassad on Telegram. He says that Trump's new threats of sanction and tariffs are nothing new. We've already been through this under Biden. I did a show a couple days ago that Biden 1.0 now equals Trump 2.0, and I proved it with a mathematical theorem. You should go back and listen to that because I think here we are. This is Trump's war. It wasn't supposed to be. He could have gotten out, but he didn't. And he said that this Colonel Kassad attempts to change Russia's position through primitive threats like sanctions are unlikely to bring Trump the outcome he thinks he's going to get. So, in other words, Russia survived Biden's sanctions, it'll survive Trump's. And that's how people believe. I'm trying to go over there here in a couple of weeks. I know I'm going to Belarus, and I'm trying to go over to Moscow too, and I'm going to try to talk to some people over there. I already got one uh, news source lined up, from people that I spoke last year to in Kazan at the BRICS summit in Russia, and I intend to go back this year, and I hope to talk to some people on the Ukraine stuff and on BRICS and some of the things that I'm putting out for you here. A guy named Alexander Kotz, who has a channel called Kotz News, and he's a pretty well-known war correspondent. And he said that Trump's plan is basically ultimatum and blackmail. That's it. Well, how can you not agree with that? That's also from the Kiev Independent. This is they backed it up in the Kiev Independent. He said that fellow Russians should prepare for the worst, saying that they might you know consider Biden what he was doing with terms of nostalgia if things get worse in Russia. And things are pretty normal in Russia. Their economy is growing. They're on a wartime footage, and so their economy is doing pretty well. Every time I go over there, place is clean, it's organized. There's plenty of food on the shelves. The ruble is right at 80 right now. And at the January when Trump took office, there was all kinds of discussion about that. The ruble was like at 113 or something, and now it's 80. So the ruble is much stronger than it was, and a lot of that is to BRICS, which we'll get to next. But this guy Kotz, he said that Trump might feel omnipotent because of what he did in Gaza. But from my point of view, I don't think he did anything in Gaza. That was BS. So who drags us into Gaza? Who drags us into Iran? Netanyahu, right? And so Trump gets in there, bombs the crap out of Iran with Netanyahu, claims he's created peace by doing so, and then convinces Netanyahu to ease off of Gaza for a little bit, but they're still beating the crap out of Gaza, starving everybody there. I don't understand how anybody can say that this is a president who's creating peace. And I like Trump. Okay, I'm not an anti-Trumper. I'm not. I always been worried about his international stuff. Nationally, I'm okay. Not the other. Internationally, he needs new people. Jeez, hire me for God's sake. I don't want that job. But it's pretty sad if I know more than your alleged experts, right? And this same guy Kotz said Moscow will never agree to any deal dictated through blackmail and threat. Now we're gonna come back to this because guess who else said that? China. And the third party said it. India. Now there's still some discussions going on, but this guy Kotz said in his closing he calls him Donald Fredovich, because usually if you're addressing somebody formally, you'll use their first and name and their middle name. So I call him Donald Jayevich because, his middle name starts with a J. So I always throw in Jayevich, like Vladimir Putin is Vladimir Vladimirovich, right? But anyway, this Kotz guy said that Donald Fredovich should leave and return as a proper statesman. The playground he's talking about, not the overconfident king of the playground. Now that's pretty snippy, I think. At any rate, by late July, in fact, today, these attitudes still remain. In Russia, on the Russian side, everywhere east of Ukraine, everybody thinks this. So Russia state media says the same things. Any of the media that you listen to quotes what Medvedev said. The hardliners in Moscow, which prevail, there's far more of them than are anti, that are pro-West and anti-war. The hardliners prefer Trump's tough approach in one respect because it proves that the U.S. wants to directly harm Russia, right? And it also fuels the notion that what? That we're not Russia is not really fighting Ukraine, but is fighting NATO and America. And everybody knows that, but this just helps them admit it. Medvedev's steps towards war with his own country comment is a prime example. Trump is essentially declaring economic war, not just on Russia, but provoking a military conflict on its own. It's the same. Such things being said by the president of the United States causes Russians to rally around Putin and say, well, 18 package of sanctions, we can probably handle another one. Send it our way. We're still gonna win, because that's what people are saying. I'm gonna find that out for sure when I go there in 2 weeks. But the people that I do speak with through channels that I talk about and everything that I read from the Russian side, both in Russian and in English, if you can find some of it yourself if you don't speak Russian. There's plenty of it to go around, and a lot of the Ukrainians are acknowledging that they're not winning, and that we want this over. In fact, a large majority want to stop the war and wouldn't mind stopping it with the losses already territorially anyway, already finished, just to stop the bloodshed. You want to stop the bloodshed? There's an idea. It's also worth noting that there's some kind of let's call it a silver lining with what they said about the change from 50 to 10. Okay. Peskov had always said that Trump's 50-day window was a serious threat, that he's coming back with, but it gave him time to analyze. And Russian markets, monetarily, rose after Trump said he was going to impose the threats. Well, a lot of people don't believe it'll appear anyway, because Trump changes his mind like most people change their underwear. And so who knows what's going to happen with these Trump's tariffs, but every time he says he's got a tariff or a sanction, well, we were just talking about it. Looks like we're going to give him a little bit more time. He's done it with everybody. What makes you think he's not going to do it here? But even if he doesn't, I don't think it changes anything on the battlefield, because I think the Russians have said repeatedly on multiple channels, multiple people, Lavrov, Peskov, Zakharova, Medvedev, name it, generals, Putin himself. These people say, we have a goal. We will make our goal. It doesn't really matter what anybody else does. And you know what? That's a comfortable position if you are in it. And frankly, I believe they are in it. I believe these sanctions might hurt them some, but not enough to make them say, no, thank you. We quit. We capitulate. People who should capitulate are in Ukraine. Save your people. That's what needs to happen. Anyway, when Trump shortened the 50 days to 10, Peskov said on July 29th that they took note of the change to 10 days, but he made no further comment. And since then, it's been pretty much silent. That says that the Kremlin, I don't know, thinks he's bluffing or don't care. Well, I mean, what is it? I mean, if he's going to put him in, okay, put them in. I don't think it matters one way or the other. In summary of this point anyway, of point number 2, just a commentary of the West, they're saying it's political gamesmanship. Moscow's line is that Trump's ultimatum is illegitimate blackmail and Russia doesn't yield to threats. Instead of concession, Trump's deadline is being used by Russia to double down on its own resolve and show the U.S. is aggressive against them, as the aggressor. And we have been the aggressor. How can you not believe that to be right? I believe it to be right. We've been pushing for this war since at least 2014, and I'd say 27 when Putin stood up in front of the Munich Security Conference and gave the best speech, at least until J.D. Vance did his this year, the best speech at the Munich Security Conference ever. That was a devastating speech, and he said exactly what the West was trying to do. And ever since that time, they've been trying to take out Russia, and they didn't believe it. So I don't know. My point of view, they were asking the wrong people. Let's talk about point number 3 of why this is occurring. And I would say this is the Kievian and NATO/EU view. There's been a good amount of pressure coming to the Trumpster from Ukraine and the EU. So the Ukraine's leaders, they applaud, of course, this tough stance on Putin and say it's long overdue. Volodymyr Zelensky praised Trump's deadline, a new one, as extremely significant. I don't think so, frankly. My point of view is, who cares? But it shows a new resolve. That was a quote from the Independent. You can find that at independent.com. But in Zelensky's eyes, Trump's move signaled a clear stance and determination that Russia must end this war and move to diplomacy. Why does Russia have to end the war and move to diplomacy? What are they going to negotiate with themselves? Basically, this is the exact same as last year when Zelensky had his first victory plan. Remember that? He had his victory plan for that he met with all these people. Where was that? Switzerland? I think it was Switzerland where they went there. Didn't invite Russia. Just one side. And here's what we're going to do. And you guys are going to help me force it. And about 10, 12, 15 people, countries didn't sign it. They were like, how are you going to sign this? Well, Russia's not here. Well, we're condemning them. Okay, great. Condemn them. What's that going to do about the war? And then 4 months later, 3, 4, at the UN conference in New York in like September, October, he comes back with his, now he doesn't call it his victory plan. He calls it a peace plan. And he gets up there and spouts off all this crap. It's the exact same thing. They're trying to dictate the terms of what's going to happen in Russia and Ukraine. It's not going to work. It's BS. So, publicly, Zelensky has thanked President Trump for his focus on saving lives and stopping this horrible war. Old Z-Man, why don't you focus on saving lives and stopping this horrible war? It'd be fairly easy to do. If you said these 4 oblasts, if you said they are now part of Russia and you walked away, that'd be that. It'd be over. That's where it's going to end anyway. You'd be lucky if they don't throw in Nikolaeva and Odessa to the south, Sumy and what's the other one up there? Kharkov to the north. You'd be lucky that doesn't happen anyway. He said that Russia pays attention to sanctions and pays attention to monetary loss. Oh, really? They stand up for themselves. And by the way, their economy is growing. What's yours doing? Their economy is growing. So the Guardian put that out and said, I'm not so sure I agree with much of what has been said on the Ukrainian side. So, but Ukraine has been begging for the West and the Trumpster to get much tougher on Moscow. And one of what's his name, Zelensky's top aides, Andrei Yermak, said Putin understands only strength, and Trump conveyed that clearly and loudly by shortening the deadline. Oh, really? What does Ukraine understand? I think that none of them understand a damn thing. if they think that these sanctions are going to change the way Russia approaches this war. It's not going to work. These even in the best case scenario, that doesn't change what Russia does. It does not change it. So I think Ukraine needs to begin to understand, and the West needs to begin to understand. And we'll get to that further when we get to what happens on the consequences of all this here in a little bit. Okay. Ukraine's tone on Trump has been an evolving matter since Trump first took office. In his first few months, he had the Steve Witkoff went over to Russia, and I was actually pretty damn hopeful. He goes over, and I thought something might happen. He was saying, you know, the status on the battlefield is bad news. Witkoff was being reasonable. Witkoff was being like me. Witkoff would go over and say something like, "We need to talk about the realities, and you guys need to concede." And then Ukraine goes, "No, we need Crimea back. We need the Donbass. We need Zaporizhia." What? Uh, You've already lost it, and as soon as you get that through your heads, this is already at your expense. Your people are dying. You've lost the stuff. You got damage, huge damage to all your infrastructure, and we need to end this somehow. But false imperatives aren't going to work. Not against Russia, not against China, and probably not against India. If there's one that it won't work against Brazil either. But if there's one that might cave a little bit, although Jai Shankar said they're not going to, Modi said they're not going to, we respect our own sovereignty, just like China said. Well, I've jumped ahead of myself on that part. From Ukraine's perspective, Trump's 50-day ultimatum was positive but too lenient. When he jumped to 10, they got all excited, and it was more in line with what they wanted. So they've been pushing. And I think that they keep Zelensky intentionally away from the old Trumpster because Trump don't like him. And quite a few people don't, but Trump doesn't like him. So they let Lindsey Graham speak for him. They let Marco Rubio maybe speak for him. So, he's just saying, Trump says no more lives should be lost. And Ukraine agrees that every extra day of war only favors Russia because Russia is winning. And so they would like to stop this. But they really, all they're asking for is a 30-day, we need a ceasefire now. Well, give us a ceasefire which says it's the end of the world and it's a permanent ceasefire. Every time the Russians get together, that's exactly what they say. But they won't do that. No, you first give us a 30-day ceasefire, and then we'll have 30 days to resolve this. Sounds logical. That's what you do when you're in the boxing ring, right? Do you just want the bell to ring so you can get over and sit down till the next round? Or do you want to end the fight? If you're the guy winning, you're going, no, I want the fight over. I want to beat the snot out of this guy. I don't want that bell to ring. Let me beat the crap out of him this round. And the Ukrainians going, no, ding, 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 ding. We need to get rid of it. Anyway, but other than Zelensky and Yermak, there's some other Ukrainian voices and military bloggers that support the idea of putting more pressure on Russia. Well, of course, they want to try to do that. They say that Putin only responds the same. Kiev sees this shortened deadline as a catalyst to a ceasefire, which is all they want. They don't want an end to the war. All they want is a ceasefire. If they, like I said, if they think they're going to get just a ceasefire and then go back to this in 30 days, better think again. How many times has Russia said they're not going to do that? Zelensky, if you remember, he didn't always have Trump's ear, and there's a few reasons for that. He's been careful to engage not with Trump, but with other allies. Zelensky's chief of staff was to contact U.S. officials to convey Ukraine's stance on any deals because there are reports that Lindsey Graham, who's a staunch Ukrainian supporter, but he communicates between Trump and Kiev. He's the one that urges Trump to shorten the timeline. When Medvedev blasted Trump's 10-day ultimatum, it was Lindsey Graham who answered back publicly. Lindsey, loves his war, and he's still living in the 80s, and he warned Medvedev in Russia that Trump is serious about ending a bloodbath. If you think he's not, you will soon be sadly mistaken. So Graham directly warned India, China, and Brazil, countries that buy the most Russian oil, that continuing such trade contributed to blood money, and Trump is going to crush their economies with tariffs if they don't stop funding Putin. I, I think he's living in a dream world because those things will not work. They will spur the de-dollarization and going to different forms of payment, and our dollar's in bad shape already. All he's going to do is speed that up. So, but there were also people like Graham in the U.S., Keir Starmer in the U.K., that encouraged Trump's tough pivot. In fact, Trump was actually meeting with Starmer on that July 28 when he announced that he was going to reduce the timeline to 10 days. I'm sorry, UK has been one of Ukraine's strongest backers. Starmer expresses alarm at Russian summer offensive. Well, because they're winning. The Russians are winning. Okay. Trump said he has not heard from Russia about a new timeline, but he certainly heard from America's allies like the UK, the 10-day thing. Russia's been pretty quiet about it, hasn't said a lot. So, in sum, Ukrainian officials and their allies applaud this shortened timeline, but for various reasons. They see it as aligning with the reality that Putin has to be confronted with strength, not given extended deadlines. I think he'll get more deadlines, and I don't think this shows anything of strength anyway. And by the way, is it really strong if it doesn't matter? I mean, seriously, here are Trump's choices. It's now Trump's war, not Biden's, unfortunately, for Trump. And he should have cut them off when he cut them off for the 3 days, Ukraine, I mean, when he cut them off, and he needs to cut off military intelligence from our satellites and our sources, cut off targeting of our weapons, quit supplying more weapons. This war will be over in a week or two. It'll be done. There, it could be extended a little bit by NATO on their own, but for all intents and purposes, if we do that, it's over. Period. And I was really hoping that that's what would happen when the old Trumpster took office, but the neocons are running foreign policy. The globalists are running foreign policy, and we'll get to that here in just a second. Ukraine hopes that this pressure forces Putin to a ceasefire table. Putin will come to the table, but he doesn't want a ceasefire. He wants the war over. How many times does he have to say it? Or if he doesn't come to the table to deal with them, he will have crippling sanctions that weaken Russia's war machine. Russia's on a war footing. Their war machine is going to be just fine, even if you do sanction them. Okay? China is not going to capitulate. I strongly doubt that India will capitulate, and Russia's largest products will continue to be sold for rubles, rupees, yuan, without the dollar even getting their chunk like they used to get, speeding it up. Well, let's get to my reason number 4 for this. The influence of Trump's advisors and public figures, right? I call this the Trump capitulation to neocons, because that's what's happening. Trump, I always was worried about him being just another globalist. And back in when he just won, now when he was campaigning, not a word about BRICS, nothing. It was as if he didn't know it was out there, but none of the candidates talked about it at all. But then he won the election. It was about 3 days later that he said something about BRICS and currency and threatened and said, and the first time he said it was after the election when he said, we're, if you try to de-dollarize or take something de-dollarize, we'll sanction and tariff you, to oblivion, basically. Well, that's really not much of a threat. And what it has done is caused the reverse. Okay. And now it's just speeding up because here we are using the dollar as a weapon, using the SWIFT system as a weapon, using the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank as a weapon. Now, we've always done that. And BRICS has been very slow since coming into existence back in whatever it was, 2008, I think, shortly after Putin's destruction of the West at that Munich Security Conference. And so I, I think people need to pay more attention to this. I really do, especially if you got money in the dollar and it might last for, I mean, the dollar is still quite strong. There's nothing wrong with it, but there are alternative things happening and Trump is speeding them up. He is speeding them up. So let's talk about a few of these people. There's been debate in his administration, even from the very beginning. They were trying to get this thing resolved. This guy, Steve Witkoff, is the most pivotal insider, and he was handpicked to negotiate with Moscow. He took several trips over there. As I said, he was pushing a strategy to allow Russia to take the 4 eastern Ukrainian regions, Donetsk, Lugansk, Zaporizhia, Kherson, as part of a ceasefire. This meant that peace settlement would emerge and it would be a permanent peace. But everyone thought it was overly Kremlin friendly. Lindsey Graham was, crapping his drawers. We can't end this war. We have to keep up this war machine. How am I going to, keep getting freebies from the military industrial complex? And many of my senator friends, when they need money too. And the only way to do that is keep a war, a big one, going on somewhere. Okay. But he, this Witkoff was seen initially as too Russia friendly, right? And, I've said this forever. Number of other people have said this forever. What's his name? Jeffrey Sachs does a very good job of talking about this. On the eastern part of Ukraine, east of the Dnieper River, the number of, or the percentage of Russian culture, the percentage of Russian people that have a Russian heritage more than Ukrainian is a significant majority. It's not like 51-49. It depends on where you are, but a lot of those places it was as high as 80%. And so historically these areas were all Russian anyway. Well, hell, the whole place was, but now we want to say Ukraine was always trying to get away from Russia. Not so, friends and neighbors. That is not the case. If you don't understand that by now, go out and watch a couple of these. A really good one was what's his name? Oliver Stone. It's called Ukraine on Fire. You can find it on YouTube, and if you haven't seen it, you should. Tells a little bit about how this all came to be. Anyway, Putin won't agree to a 30-day ceasefire. He said that from the very beginning, every time people get together, all they want is a 30-day ceasefire for an effort to attempt to solve this. It's not going to work, but that's what they do. They claim now that Putin is stringing along these insiders that are telling Trump this from the American side that finally have his ear. Trump is listening to the wrong people. And, basically, they're saying that what Putin is asking for would be the end of Ukrainian statehood. Well, there's plenty of talk about that splitting it into 3 with the parts that Russia has already taken or they've been historically taken anyway, with Poland taking a chunk and Romania taking a chunk. And that would be that. And so there's been plenty of talk about that. Trump is now frustrated that after a month, Russia won't accept a full ceasefire. But they've said all along, we're not going to accept a ceasefire. Trump repeatedly signaled he was ready to accept most of Kremlin's demands. That's not true, by the way. And this is from the Atlantic Council. And despite these positive things, Putin remains unmoved, engaging in endless, they call it, stalling tactics. No, he's been very solid with what he will agree to. And it won't be, what the West wants. It will not be. And he has to get it by force. He's going to take it. So, this uncompromising Russian position, talking about position based bargaining, leaves Trump in an awkward position because Trump thinks he's the deal maker, right? But he hasn't offered anything. What has Trump offered? He's not offering anything but an ultimatum. How is Trump a deal maker if he's not willing to concede something? And by the way, concede something that's already lost, like the 4 areas you've already, 5, if you include Crimea, 5 areas you've already lost. End this crap. Be a stud, stand up and tell the world, listen, it's over. I'm telling Zelensky what to do. You might actually be able to do that, but Putin's not going to do it. He's in a position, he's stronger than you. And people don't want to hear that. Frankly, I don't want to admit that. But the fact is, Trump's got nothing. Remember when they was talking about Zelensky and the cards he had to play? Where are the cards? How have they changed from the time period when he was sitting in the office of the Oval Office with Zelensky and he told him he had no cards? How has it changed till today? If anything, it's gotten worse. He used to have a couple of, a jack or two. Now he's got nothing. He's got sixes, if that. And he's got nothing to play, no hand to play. So, also in Trump's team, there's this. I hate to call people names. I almost called him an idiot, and I try not to do that. Because I don't know the guy. Usually, you got to know somebody before you can call him an idiot. I'd appreciate it when you get to know me. You get to know me first, and then call me an idiot. Don't do it if you don't know me. If you believe me to be an idiot just because you listen to me on one radio program, well, more power to you. But please don't call me that. You can think I'm wrong, no problem. I will always honor your opinion. I hope you honor mine. But this General Kellogg, I do not honor his opinion. Let's put it that way. And I think he is less than intelligent in this part. Here's what Kellogg argues, right? Want to talk about ultimatums? Here's one. Kellogg argues, against Witkoff, by the way, that Ukraine will never agree to unilaterally cede the territory that Russia has already taken. Yeah, but they're not unilaterally ceding it if Russia's already taken it. That's foolish and stupid. So all of these territories, all of them are already belong to Russia. People in there are already getting Russian passports, by the way, and they already have them. And so this internal debate between Witkoff and Kellogg mirrored a broader problem in Washington. Some Republicans and all Democrats have been alarmed that Trump's team was running too sharply toward Moscow. Frankly, why in the world should we run away from Moscow? We should have been partners with Russia long ago. When I served in the military and had a diplomatic passport and was an interpreter for them when after the Soviet Union collapsed, frankly, I thought that's what was going to happen. Instead, we abandoned them, let the bandits take them, and sent over all of our bandits to buy them out and attempted to destroy them and still treated them like an enemy. You want to know why we are where we are today? That right there. That is the reason. You treat them as an enemy. Guess what? At some point, they're going to become an enemy. And so we created this. So I don't know. Influential GOP donors apply pressure. There's a major donor named Eric Levine. He said that Witkoff must go. In a letter to big party bigwigs, he called Witkoff's approach taking the Kremlin side. You know, many people say that about me. You're a Putin stooge. You're a Putin, I don't know what do they call him? Apologizer. You're apologetic about Putin. Senators like Marco Rubio also lobbied to rein in Witkoff. So by mid 2025, back in June, Trump started taking away Witkoff's authorities, I guess, or not listening to him as much. He's still in the same spot, but you don't hear about him as much. They've minimalized him. And so we see this as Trump begins to talk more about the Lindsey Graham BS, the Marco Rubio BS, all of the same neocon, globalist, military industrial complex a-holes that love war and still think that Ukraine can win somehow if we give them, some sort of magic bean. They can grow the magic beanstalk and climb up over, and everything will be just fine. The Atlantic Council observed that after months of Trump appeasing Putin, I don't see it that way. He didn't give him anything. Putin set the stage for a recent change of tone with the White House and the renewal of arms deliveries to Ukraine, along with this week's fresh ultimatum. We get a new ultimatum. Isn't that wonderful? That's the Atlantic Council. And so I tried to stay on the Western side and combat it instead of when I researched it, trying to get. I have a few Eastern opinions, but most of the stuff is there. And now let's talk about Lindsey the Graham cracker. Oh boy. One of the very sad facts of the planet is that Lindsey Graham is still in office. Oh my God, can we please get rid of this guy? And he has been a critical outside influencer, and somehow he's gotten the old Trumpster's ear. He's been a Republican senator for ever, and he's a war hawk like no other. And he has, some kinds of weird relationship with Trump. Sometimes he's an ally, and sometimes a critic. On Ukraine, Graham is firmly, let's call it, behind Kiev, and he wants to punish Moscow, and he thinks he still can do it all by himself, right? He visited Ukraine more times than he's visited his own home state, and declared that Russians dying in the war is the best money that America has ever spent. Now, this enraged Moscow in 2023. I remember this. Listened to a lot of Russian commentators talk about it. Graham counseled Trump that being too soft on Putin is politically and strategically dangerous. When Trump first announced the 50-day deadlines, Graham and this other, the guy that's always in his pocket, Senator Blumenthal, they praised Trump's warning as a powerful warning. They'd been pushing bipartisan legislation for more sanctions. Oh boy, we got them. So Trump's stance finally aligned with theirs. After the deadline was shortened to 10 days, Graham became Trump's attack dog on social media. He jumps on Medvedev, suggests that he was encouraging Trump to hold firm and tighten the screws. Graham invokes the word bloodbath and tells Russia that they'll be sadly mistaken if they test Trump's resolve. Yeah, I see that the other way around, friends and neighbors. But Graham's influence has definitely helped tilt Trump away from Witkoff's stance toward ending this with something other than capitulation. Ultimately, I believe this war is going to end in capitulation. Okay? Let's talk about reason number 5. Okay? Reason number 5 that I think the 50 days went down to 10. And it's a horror story because I say the deep state and the global elite still control the world and America. Period. They do. And let's start with Zelensky, right? Zelensky was appointed by this crowd of globalists. Well, he won his election, but I mean, it started with the 2014 getting rid of the elected leader of Ukraine through this BS coup that we supported, and we, just like we do everywhere else, we do. And, you can't find a war that we don't like or that we haven't lost since the Second World War, really, and we didn't win that one. We were only part of it. So I don't know. Zelensky said to Trump that Ukraine is ready for a deal but will not surrender. They said that in the Kiev Independent. So late in 2024, Zelensky hinted at some flexibility, pursuing recovery of occupied lands by diplomatic means and not military, because they're not going to win anyway. But that was back when he was trying to be reasonable when he thought Trump might win. But he also uh, stumped for was trying to get elected Kamala Harris. He made it clear that Ukraine is never going to recognize the occupied territories that Russia has as Russian. That's never going to happen. Well, it's either going to happen or it's not. And so I don't know this, but then he changed all the people in these occupied countries. They passed a law about a month ago saying that those people can't vote. Those people cannot vote if they have an election, but they still have to have Ukrainian passports, according to him. So if you live in Donetsk, Lugansk, Zaporizhia, Kherson, you're still a Ukrainian citizen. You get to vote. That means you would get to vote to end the war. You would get to vote to say who gets to be the president. That wouldn't be Zelensky, would it? So he's talks out of both sides of his mouth too, right? But he wanted diplomatic means, but he's also made it clear that he's never going to agree to anything either. So why is it okay for him to never agree to anything and have a position that he's going to die for, and but not Russia? Why? Makes no sense to me. So, and it's not very professional way to negotiate. Anyway, in April of 2025, Witkoff for the first time sat in a meeting with senior Ukrainians with Rubio in Paris and tried to convince Trump that Ukraine itself wouldn't agree to the pro-Russian deal that he was floating. They all talked about this. This is from the Brookings Institute. If Trump wants a legacy as a peacemaker, he's got to come up with a deal that both sides can accept. And he's not a deal maker if he can't make a deal. And all he has right now is this threat. And Ukraine isn't going to accept getting rid of these 4 places. That will never happen. So what, we're supposed to help them take them back? What are we going to tell Russia? Give them back? That's that? It's over? Russia, leave. That's what we tried to do. Kellogg. That was his idea, right? Nonsense. But Zelensky and Yermak, they have been very responsive and happy about this 10-day ultimatum. They say that it will show that Trump's on the right side of history, right? And given Trump's political instincts about the Ukrainian president, remember that this is he figured into some of the impeachment stuff they released in 2019 when the election was going on. It was Zelensky who released some negative information about him and his campaign about taking money from the Ukraine side. They released that. I forget the guy's name. The what do you call it? Well, I can't remember what they called him. Damn it! I think he was a finance guy in the Trump campaign team, but I can't remember his name. So, also deep state, Keir Starmer. Trump's meeting with Starmer on 28 occurred literally hours before he went public. Remember, I always say that Trump changes his mind like some people change underwear. If he'd been talking to Putin, he would have come up with something else. Every time he talks to Putin, he beats up on Zelensky. Every time he talks to Zelensky, he beats up on Putin. Everybody says, oh, no, he's the deal maker. That's art of the deal. Really? Where's the deal now? Where's the art of the deal now? I don't know, but it's not around. British officials keep sharing intelligence and battlefield assessments, and they're very worried themselves about Pokrovsk. That means you got the entire Dnieper end of where the Dnieper River comes out and meets I forget the other river, and I'm not looking at a map right now. I'm just spitballing. But that is where, if you take Pokrovsk, you've got front door seat. You're on the porch to get into Dnepropetrovsk. And if you get it in they're tickling those lines. They're still in Sumy too, up on the north side. But anyway, Starmer's influence is also hawkish, just like Lindsey Graham. We want more. We want more. You need to give it. You're America. We can't win without you. So they yank Trump's chain, make him feel good, and convince him that anybody who's not deep state that is talking internationally, you don't need to listen to. And I believe this is going to cost Trump his peacemaker status. I believe it's going to mean that the US dollar collapse goes further, and that's that. So the domestic political calculations of the deep state and others are also affect Trump's shift. By summer of this year, Trump was being criticized for not having ended the war in 24 hours. We all know that. I never thought that was going to happen anyway. His approval ratings haven't, they're pretty stagnant and going a little bit to the lower side. And critics on the left and the right are, beating up on him. Reddit joked that somebody on Reddit, several threads, that the administration doesn't understand the concept of a deadline because they put it out 50 days, and they'll change that as well. So I don't know. Trump says that if Putin doesn't yield by early August, Trump can say, I did everything I could, and it's Putin's fault, and so they deserve these harsh sanctions. Okay, even if you put them in place, it isn't gonna change anything. Okay, so Trump may have been influenced by who wanted to advise him not to look weak or indecisive, right? So, in summary, Trump's opinion evolved due to a mix of Putin being immovable, internal advice from people he shouldn't be listening to, inputs from the allies, like Starmer, Macron, people like that guy from Canada, and he claims a political strategy because he thinks he can push something on the dollar, which we'll get to in just a minute. Witkoff, who urged patience and concession, lost all their sway. Those urging a tougher stance, Graham, Kellogg, Rubio, Zelensky, Starmer, he's starting to listen to them. The outcome of all this is Trump is essentially giving Putin, they call it a final, but there'll be another final after this, short-term stance, after which Trump is going to align very fully, which he already has, with the hawks, which we've already talked about. As Trump himself put it, and I try not to swear, but Trump said, we get a lot of bullshit from Putin. He's very nice, but it's meaningless. That came from Politico. That remark in a cabinet meeting reveals how far Trump's view of Putin has shifted. It also shifted when he said, I don't think I need to talk to him anymore. And he doesn't want to talk to him. And now I'll accuse him of doing exactly the same thing that Biden did. This is how you deal with Russia. You don't talk to them. Well, why would they talk to you if this is your stance? Biden didn't talk to him for 3.5 years. At least we were getting to the point where we were talking, even if it wasn't about the war, we're talking about other things. Why can't Russians participate in world sports events? Why can't, Russians go to Olympics? Why can't somebody travel a little more freely? All because you think, are people really this, I don't know, immovable in their positions that they believe that Ukraine is God's gift to the planet? I thought that was Israel. Isn't Israel the one who can do no wrong? That's what I always thought. Geez, they can bomb the crap out of anybody and no warning, no nothing. And then what do? We support it every single time. Not once have we ever condemned them for any of their actions. And I'm not even really sure that we should. I don't necessarily care. But why is it a different set of rules for Israel than there is for Russia? They're doing it 10 times worse than what Russia's doing. They're monsters, what they're doing to people, in my opinion. And I read Netanyahu's book. That guy is an unstable monster. Go read it. Go read his book. That guy believes that he is God's God's man. Okay, well, okay, I believe that too. Well, could that in 10 cents will get me a cup of coffee? Well, not anymore, $10 for a cup of coffee. But anyway, let's get to the one more point on this, one more reason. And that is, where'd I go?
these are fringe theories because there's a bunch of weirdos out there too, both on YouTube, on Instagram, on Telegram. So let's read a couple of them. So the dramatic nature of, and this is number 6, other theories about why Trump shortened the 50 days down to 10. The dramatic nature of Trump's ultimatum being shortened down to 10. He's essentially giving a nuclear armed adversary less than 2 weeks to end a war or face severe consequences. Of course, he's saying nothing to the other side. I mean, I know I've pointed that out several times, but this is nonsense. It unsurprisingly has ignited a whole lot of speculation, rumor, conspiracy theory on social media and fringe platforms. They always call Telegram a fringe platform because they don't control it, right? And places like TikTok videos, that they want to talk about that too. Many discussions, like let's see, users express skepticism about Trump's move. One Reddit comment said, 10 or 12 days, I think the administration doesn't really understand the whole deadline concept. They poke fun at Trump's 10 to 12 days. That means he didn't really set a deadline if it's 10 to 12 days, right? Others on Reddit argued that Trump's tariff threat is going to hurt Americans more than Russians. They say Trump is going to increase taxes to U.S. companies and that will spread the cost to U.S. citizens. I think it has worse events, which we'll get to in just a minute. This is a common sentiment among those online that Trump is going to be shooting the U.S. in the foot economically. Well, there's lots of proof that these sanctions and, in fact, these tariffs, which he sets and then removes, hell, a couple of them were supposed to take place today, right? 50%, 125% on Brazil, something like that. We'll see if tomorrow he's reduced those scenarios. I'm not so sure. There's also been debate about whether Putin would take the threat seriously because Trump makes threats and positions all the time and then doesn't do anything. And he'd just call Trump's bluff and say, well, all right, Russia can endure whatever Trump throws at us anyway. That's what I say. I say that even if it does occur, so what? It's not going to change anything. And I'm not Russian. I'm an American who speaks Russian, and that. There's also cynicism about how they're going to be enforced. We've heard Trump threaten tariffs before, and then he backs off, said one user. On TikTok and Instagram, short videos that sensationalize the countdown. There are clips of them. 10 days to World War III. You have that. Or Trump's ultimatum is nuclear war next, especially with him putting nuclear subs moving them. Not that there weren't already some there. That's a stupid and foolish move. Russia has a lot more than we do, and they're a lot more powerful. What was it? The largest ship in the military, in any military, went out, wasn't it? Isn't the Admiral Nahimov? I saw an article about that it's the largest destroyer on the planet, and it went out. It's been in refurbishment, rearmament, all of that stuff, updating and modernizing for 22 years. And they had just kind of introduced it in the late 80s. And then the Cold War ended. Russia, Soviet Union anyway, fell apart. And for 23 years, well, Russia was without money in the 90s. And so they sat there. And then they finally put it into remote repairs in 22 years ago. And they've spent all this money. It's tons of money. It's nuclear, 2 nuclear reactors on it. Now it's updated with all of these hypersonic missiles. And so, it's possible, friends and neighbors, that we're pushing war buttons, and I don't think we should be. Mainstream analysts are pretty foolish, in my opinion, but some are saying the economic sanctions aren't going to work. Military might, but nobody'd be stupid enough to do that. Especially on TikTok, one viral video of a self-proclaimed military analyst said that if Putin doesn't withdraw, Trump has a plan to strike Russia himself. And no evidence of that, but people are putting these fringe theories out there on Telegram, especially in the Russian-speaking version. There's a lot of chatter, a lot of military bloggers, a lot of mocking of Trump.
Trump's ultimatum is actually coordinated with Putin. One person says, I know a couple of people who say that Trump and Putin are really working together. That Putin, Xi Jinping, and Donald Trump have something in the fore, and they're saying they're playing 4D chess. The theory goes that Trump needs the war to end quickly for his own political benefit, and Putin might stage a pseudo compromise to help Trump. There's no concrete basis for this of any kind, but that doesn't stop people from saying it. But this shows the distrust of the system. I don't believe the system, not remotely. I don't believe anything Trump said. That's why I've given you 6 reasons about why what he said is incorrect or factually, a joke. It's not right. So, at any rate, the Ukrainian telegram group's fringe speculation includes the idea that Putin is going to escalate dramatically and might even consider a tactical nuclear weapon. I think he might throw out some Oreshniks. They asked him about that yesterday when his sitting in the cemetery with Lukashenko. They talked about that. But anyway, just before Trump's deadline, they might shoot off a couple of tactical nukes or Oreshniks or something like that. Most of this is just fear mongering and not reality. Another guy says on in the West, this is on like place like Truth Social, said that Trump gave a shorter deadline because he has his own secret intelligence that something big is going to happen before that. That's why he changed it. For instance, some says that Trump knows about a false flag attack or a Ukrainian collapse. Ukrainian collapse, I'd believe that absolutely. I don't know. But some suggest that this 10 to 12 day timeline coincides with another August military exercise in the U.S. Russian state propaganda TV talking about people like Vladimir Solovyov and people like that. But I like listening to Solovyov and his format and his team. That's actually very well put together. You don't have to believe him. I don't believe some of the stuff he says, but it's certainly worth listening to. They float these theories that one talking point is that Trump is using Ukraine to distract from his own legal troubles. That's a possibility, but I doubt it. Russian pundits say that whenever Trump feels politically cornered, he turns to foreign policy stunts like Clinton, who bombed Yugoslavia during the time he got impeached. Russia is going to threaten Russia during his problems, right? They say the Americans shouldn't trust Trump's war stand because it's, kind of a wag the dog scenario. I don't know. I just think it's funny to see all of this. Trump does need a win. So now he's manufacturing a crisis in Ukraine. A crisis in Ukraine really does exist, though, because Ukraine is losing. And so if they can get this to somehow to stop, that would be preferable to what's going on now. I don't think anything the West is doing is going to help resolve this in a peaceful manner. This demand for a 30-day ceasefire so you can rebuild and regroup is never going to be agreed upon. There's been several fake things that this countdown clock on Twitter that was supposedly from CNN that said time left for World War III, 10 days. CNN had to issue a statement denying it, but they said it was put up by CNN and it wasn't. So on any Telegram, any given day you get on Telegram, you can find a mix of hope and apprehension on the Ukrainian side and on the Russian side. Some say they hope that Trump maybe can end this nightmare in 10 days. Others warn that Putin's going to ignore Trump and the West, needs to stand firm. We need this globalist. So in summary, fringe and social media narratives are either alarmist, conspiratorial, sarcastic, skeptical. Common thread is that Trump's move is generating intense discourse in the hidden policy circles, the deep state. Much of this is just noise, but people get, this public perception. It means that Trump is getting beat up upon. that Trump needs to end this because he said he could. And the White House has no idea how to clarify what the deadline is about and whether these sanctions are going to work. And they don't want to go to war. That's not in the background. U.S. isn't going to go to war with Russia. If they do, it's foolish and idiotic. This war has been full of information and disinformation battles. Trump's ultimatum is yet another front in that public information battle. And truth and fiction, they neither one exist fully. They're all blended into some social media BS. And I think I've outlined just about all of it. I wanted to talk a little bit about the what happens because of this, and it's, in my view, it's a it's a big deal. What will happen when these sanctions are imposed? First, let's talk about the aftermath. So, assume we go the 10 days, which I assume is going to happen. We go these 10 days, and Trump installs these sanctions. Here's what it is. Here's what he's threatened. His ultimatum isn't just diplomatic posturing. It hinges on a massive economic roulette wheel. He's threatening secondary sanctions and 100% tariffs that will really affect the entire globe if he manages to do it. Understanding the economic consequences of what Trump is suggesting is important to do. It's very risky, and in my opinion, not all that likely to work. Okay. Now I admit that my economics degree is from University of Illinois, so it's not like I'm some kind of a God's gift to the planet in this, but I understand economics as well as the next guy, probably a little better. I understand Russia a hell of a lot better than the next guy, again, in my humble opinion. But if you don't understand it, you need to figure it out because there's potential fallout for major powers like China, India, Brazil. Major powers. And they are all three Russia's key trade partners. And there's huge implications for the US dollar's global role. Not necessarily instantly, but in short term, yeah, you'll have some. But long term is more important because we're speeding toward that end anyway. And Trump is speeding it up under Trump's plan. These sanctions and these, I don't know what, tariffs all over the place in 10 days. If Russia does not agree to a ceasefire by the deadline, U.S. will not only reinstate full sanctions on Russia itself, but will impose secondary tariffs on 100% of any country doing significant business with Russia. That came from CBS News. These tariffs will target key sectors like energy, agriculture, and defense, aiming to choke off trade that props up Russia's, they call it, war. It's the Ukraine war. More than a dozen countries are in the crosshairs. The biggest, China. Okay. Russia's number one trading partner has a 34% share of Russia's trade in post 2022. You check that out in Indian and Chinese newspapers, largely by buying Russian oil and gas that Europe has boycotted. Well, plus, they opened two huge tubes running it into China. They're running gas into there, natural gas, liquid natural gas. Of course, they're the biggest buyer, and India's getting it too. So is North Korea. They're gonna keep getting it. They're not going to turn it away. Jai Shankar said the other day. Well, let's stick on China for a second. China and India together now buy 85 to 95% of Russia's crude oil. 85 and 90%. And they get a good discount for buying it. It's cheap, right? If you put 100% tariffs on Chinese goods, effectively decoupling the world's two largest economies. Now, I got to tell you, I think China's been doing this anyway. They're already doing it. They've changed all their soybean purchases to Brazil. That was huge. They never were big oil or gas people from us. It was something like 6% or something that they got from the U.S. And they're mirroring whatever the U.S. puts. They're doing the same thing right back. So China, I don't think you're going to get them. Beijing reacted,
harshly. Okay. The foreign ministry blasted his threat, Trump's threat, as illegal, unilateral sanctions, and coercion and pressure that will not solve problems. Okay, and I've told all of you this, that when I was at the BRICS conference last year, the biggest theme of all journalists, all people, anybody involved from a government level, including all the people from Africa who are coming and exploring whether they wanted to be in BRICS. I tell you what, I ran around, bounced from person to person to talk to them and find out what was going on and why. And the biggest thing, and I'm an American, I'm one of, I don't know, found three of us in there. And I got to talk to a lot of people, and they say the reason is the U.S. isn't a good neighbor. They don't deal well with other people. They always try to force. They don't try to work with people. That's supposed to change with Donald Trump, wouldn't you say? And so I think these threats from the Chinese Foreign Ministry, what was it? Besant came back last week and said that they appreciate their own sovereignty and they're probably not going to comply because Besant's over there trying to get him to do so. But what China said was there are no winners in a tariff war, and they're absolutely right. I don't think it's going to work. I don't think China cares. They have signaled that they're not going to bow to Trump's demands to stop trading with Russia, and that such pressure from the US will push China and Russia even closer. Okay? India. India is Russia's number 2 oil purchaser, customer, after 2022, and they increased their imports because of discounted Russian crude. It buys Russian fertilizer, uh, which is crucial for their own agriculture. Brazil is a huge buyer of Russian fertilizer. India tried to maintain neutrality, and they've always said that. Jai Shankar, who goes out, he's the foreign minister, and he goes out and he speaks very intelligently about this, and he's going, look. There was somebody questioning him from the West, and I forget what it was. And she said, listen, uh, what about the Russia's war in Ukraine? Russia keeps attacking Ukraine, and how come India can support that? And he's going, we don't support that. And she says, well, if you buy things from Russia, you're supporting what they say. He said, no, we have different needs. And it's pretty much hypocritical for you to come over here and tell me that we should support. What about you supporting Pakistan when Pakistan is against India? What about you in China supporting China's role and when they have a sliver of land that India and China have been fighting about? He said, you guys are, and he said it quite well. He goes, you guys pick and choose, which battles are important and when people are supposed to, he called it virtue signaling, he used the right term, when we're supposed to virtue signal by hating another country, we're just supposed to fall in line with you, and we're not willing to do that. So I don't think India's going to do it, right? I don't think it's going to happen. A 100% tariff on Indian goods or an embargo on Indian oil purchase would strain U.S. India's strategic relationships. So far, India has been saying that Graham's warning about blood money isn't going to change anything. New Delhi sees Trump's move as an attack on its own sovereignty and energy security, just like China said. We are a sovereign country. Quit trying to tell us what to do. Domestically in India, some are going to try to use it to stoke anti-American sentiment and push for more, and they've already got a huge amount of it, rupee ruble arrangements to bypass the use of the dollar. Now let's talk about other BRICS countries and the global south. Brazil, which is a huge buyer of Russian fertilizer and an exporter of food to all of the BRICS people. Turkey, which is a NATO member but is a huge Russian energy importer. And the UAE, which is also a BRICS member, financial hub for Russian oil trade and a haven for sanctioned oligarchs. Where do they go from Russia? They all go to the UAE, and they all of them could be impacted, but many of these countries practice non-alignment, meaning we don't get involved. It's not our war. Something that I was hoping that the old Trumpster would do, and it seemed like he would.
But these countries, all of them, the global south, all of the Africas, all of the, did you hear that Nicaragua yesterday, the president of Nicaragua recognized the 4 areas that Russia had taken as Russian property, the first to do so. And he was pretty blunt about it. I wish I had that article pulled up. I don't. But the Nicaraguan president said those are Russian territories. Period. End of sentence. And it's time we recognize them. You know, just like a lot of people are going to recognize Palestine. And but many of these countries who practice non-alignment will strongly resent Washington dictating what they can do. They resent it anyway. They're tired of Washington telling them what to do. Brazil's President Lula has been very vocal about finding alternatives to the dollar in trade. Turkey's economy, hit by a 100% tariff or a loss of Russian gas, would be horrible for them. These nations are going to find workarounds and not just comply. They need Russian resources too bad. This is an empty threat, in my opinion. From Trump's perspective, threatening more sanctions is meant to amplify Putin's pressure by isolating Russia completely. But Russia isn't isolated. They keep trying to say Russia is isolated, but if you go, they're in African what do you call them? Congresses that they all form together and create an association. They're in the Asian markets. They're everywhere. Russia's all over the place, and they're not isolated. The West is becoming isolated, okay, financially. But Trump is trying to enforce a global economic blockade of Russia. His theory is that if countries like China and India lose access to the U.S. market, now I say that's an empty threat. That, who gives a crap? If the U.S. doesn't want us, we'll find other people. And BRICS has been doing it anyway. We're going to end up in the U.S. as being those that are isolated long term. That will happen. And BRICS isn't going to go on the ash heap of history. They're all going to keep on doing it. And Trump is the one forcing us that direction. Okay? These countries might curtail some purchases from Russia to maintain good standing with the U.S., but I doubt it. And that might, if it does happen, it might cost Russia, some money. I don't think it'll stop their resolve. This approach from Trump's, trying to force India, China, Brazil, other countries do this, has enormous costs and risks. Okay. The risk to the U.S. economy is pretty huge. Imposing 100% tariffs on major trade partners means that Americans will pay more for those imported products. All the crap you buy from Amazon, well, double it, 100% tariff. Who's going to pay that? I can no longer get I buy a package every 2 months of flax seed, grind it all up, put it in stuff, and I get that for $8 a bag. What if it goes up to 16? I'm the guy getting hosed, right? But China is the U.S. largest goods supplier. A tariff war will drive up those consumer prices, and financial markets will also get spooked. CBS News says that when Trump first floated 100% tariffs, Russian markets actually went up, as did the ruble, because most investors doubted that Trump would follow through anyway. But the absence of immediate panic suggests that cooler heads will prevail before a global trade war erupts. Well, I don't think it's going to be I think it's going to be because Trump capitulates. That's what I think. Okay. If Trump actually pulls the trigger and shocks the world economy, the shock could possibly be severe, triggering a recession or market turmoil. But also important, hugely important, is de-dollarization and BRICS countermeasures. Perhaps the most far-reaching consequence would be the accelerating the move away from the US dollar, which is happening anyway, but it will happen faster. Okay. Countries threatened by U.S. sanctions and tariffs have a very strong motivation already to create alternative payment systems to avoid U.S. financial leverage. Now, China's already done this, and people are paying with the yuan in huge quantities. This was well before this ultimatum, and BRICS nations like Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa recently expanding to include many others in their recent conference, which I had hoped to get to but didn't, in Brazil. So countries that are threatened, as I said, are Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, and a couple others. In late 2024, where I was in Kazan at the conference for the BRICS conference, leaders openly discussed a new BRICS currency, and they even showed off a symbolic BRICS banknote. Never took place, but I did see the showing of the banknote because I was there. Trump said, "We require a commitment." He started yelling on social media. "We require a commitment that they will neither create a new BRICS currency nor back any other currency to replace the mighty US dollar, or they will face 100% tariffs." Yeah. That I think the split opinions that I got, most of them were pretty harsh, and Trump wanting to tie his tariffs to protect the dollar dominance, but we used the dollar as a weapon, and he didn't like that. He warned BRICS nations in November of 2024, after he won election, that any alternative reserve currency plans would result in this 100% tariff. Now, by targeting China, India, and Brazil over their Russian trade, he's trying to follow through on that warning, but most economists argue that this plan will backfire. And I'm not an economist by profession, but I believe that too. Trump's threats and policies will only turbocharge de-dollarization and the move toward BRICS. That came from the Asia Times. Okay. China and India already conduct a lot of trade in yuan and rupees with Russia. Sanctions will push them to expand these arrangements, and they will invite others to join a non-dollar bloc. It's going to happen. A guy named Jerry Frankel in The Guardian noted that Trump seemed to view a BRICS currency as a serious threat, but said that such a currency is unlikely to succeed due to BRICS internal indifferences. I think he's wrong there from my own discussions with people at the conference last year, but I also don't think they'll do it through a BRICS currency. I think they will do it through a trading system to get rid of SWIFT, a what do they call it when they not when trades are executed, when money is exchanged, they have to have a closing, like when you close on your house. Let's say Brazil's going to buy or sell a load of soybeans to Russia. The and Russia is going to sell a load of fertilizer to Brazil. If they don't do the exchange, if they're not the same, different companies are doing this, and they're not all state owned, right? So company A has to put all of the Brazilian, I believe Brazil uses pesos. They have to take all those pesos in Brazil, and then the central bank, governmental bank, from this is what they were talking about in the Kazan last year, that they're trying to create an exchange system for closing transactions, just like the SWIFT system or similar to the SWIFT system, to allow an alternative so that you don't have to use that system, right? So I don't believe they will create a BRICS currency. I think they will create a method of exchange based on something other than the dollar, and usually that will be their own currency. And the U.S. can't control whether Brazil sends its rupees to Russia for fertilizer, or whether Russia buying uh, soybeans from Brazil is and pays for it in rubles, U.S. can't say much about that. Now they can tariff Brazil the other way, but they've already ran Brazil away anyway. And maybe it's remember that Seinfeld episode, "Rip it off" when you're going to get rid of the girlfriend. Well, maybe the 100% tariffs. Now Russia's had 18 rounds of this. Several other countries have had many rounds of this. It's a rip off the band-aid, rip off the scab, whatever it is you're doing. I think that's what's going to happen if this results. The intent to sidestep the dollar is real. That's no joke. They're trying to do it, and most countries, including our allies, are selling U.S. debt. This is a bad thing, and they're refusing to buy more. America wants to borrow a bunch more money, 5 trillion, but nobody wants to take it in debt anymore. US has been downgraded in its credit rating, and it's downgraded some, and that is going to continue. Mark my words, because the intent to sidestep the dollar is real. US coercion financially will strengthen the resolves of BRICS countries, especially, and other people will join. They're establishing alternatives already and have been since 2007. If anything, they're going to speed up this process. So, if even if it's not a single currency, it's the network payment and far greater use of the Chinese yuan for international settlements. That is already happening, folks. That's happening. And, call your financial advisor, figure it out. One other thing that this is going to talk about, this is global unity versus fragmentation. This is still the globalists and deep staters trying to control the world. Okay. Trump's secondary sanctions threat puts the U.S. at odds with some of its own allies. Turkey is a NATO ally, but a big Russian energy importer and a hub for Russian business. Would Trump actually tariff Turkey or risk retaliation? I'm not so sure. Some European countries have trade with Russia. Still buying oil and gas from Hungary, stuff, places like that. Trump's approach is unilateral. He's strong arming everyone. You're going to follow this policy or face punishment. This is going to cause diplomatic problems. Some countries will openly defy the U.S., like Nicaragua, who just recognized the Donbass, like I told you. And they're going to try to, bet that they can band together within BRICS or other formers to mitigate U.S. pressure, and that will continue. We cannot stop that. We have already seen China, Russia, and others conduct far more trade in non-dollar currencies specifically to insulate themselves from sanctions. We're the nuts, and they're tired of following us just because we say so or threaten something. These threats aren't going to work forever, and they're already starting to fail. Okay? China, Russia, and others conduct more trade in non-dollar currency. India pays in rupees for Russian oil. China pays in the yuan. If Trump's ultimatum day passes without peace, which it will pass without peace, the stage is set for a possible showdown. If the U.S. slaps tariffs on China and India simultaneously, basically initiating a trade war on multiple fronts, the Times of India reported that letters about new tariff rates were being prepared to be sent out to 20 countries with a deadline of August 1. This means the Trump administration is seriously mapping out this course. Secondary sanctions legislation in this nut job of Lindsey Graham and Blumenthal, they of course praised Trump's stance, and there is likely a movement in Congress to legally mandate such sanctions on nations that help Russia evade sanctions itself. Trump would have domestic banking backing to some extent, but U.S. imports or U.S. industries that rely on imports are warning of serious consequences already. Let's talk about the Russian economy for just a second. Now, I haven't been there in a year. Last time I was there for 6 weeks in Vladikavkaz. I was in Bashkir, and I was in Tatarstan, and I was in Kazan. The economy seemed, there things were there. Things were, they're building everything just like us. There's a lot of growth, a lot of good things going on. And I don't live there, and I didn't quiz people about it, but it seemed like pretty positive, very clean, lots of new stuff, and a good amount of money. Now that was a year ago, and that was 2.5 years in. Now here we are, 3.5 years in. I'm trying to get into Russia in a couple of weeks, see what I can do over there, and check some things out. But from the Russian perspective, if Trump enacts tariffs, it could be painful. Russia has weathered sanctions so far, and 18 rounds of them by changing their focus. They didn't trade with us that much anyway. And the oil they traded with the EU switched to the US. Well, that's part of the business. So Russia has switched to China and India, and then they took over a lot of American stuff that Americans just left. But if something affect China and India, Russia might face severe shortages in revenue. I don't think that's gonna happen. I think China and India are gonna tell the U.S. and Donald Trump to go pound sand. Military production in Russia is way up. Spending is way up. The Russian economy is in war footing, and many Russian defense industries have a very high income level and production level. Putin created a system where parts of the economy that thrive on war are, cruising along, and but a sudden disruption, could affect them. This is hegemonic bullying that pushes India, China closer to Russia out of principle. They're principled. The Chinese foreign minister said, we want you to respect our sovereignty. We respect yours. Why don't you respect ours? Quit telling us what to do. We will trade with who we want to trade with, says India. I think the U.S. is in, and Trump is in for a rude awakening in 10 days. That's me. Putin might welcome a shutdown that forces countries to choose a side in his hopes that resentment of U.S. bullying pushes them closer. That's a serious threat. Uh, the ruble actually got stronger after Trump's announcement. They say this is because Trump left a window of time and a history of backing down. But if August 8 comes and Trump slaps tariffs, we might see emergency measures to stabilize the ruble. Maybe Beijing would support, and who knows? I don't know. What about the idea of principles in other countries that they have, and the U.S. just likes to force people to do things? We're a big bad bully in the U.S. So, in summary, on this entire story, Trump is effectively wagering U.S. economic strength and the dollar's clout to enforce his ultimatum. He appears prepared to endure a trade confrontation with multiple major economies in what he thinks will stop the war. But even if it stops the war, what then? That's my question. Trump has tied the Ukraine war ultimatum to the broader battle against de dollarization. He's linking the two foolishly, in my opinion. If he goes too far, he will hasten the dollar's decline by forcing nations to make a stand, as Russia already has, as India and China and Brazil have indicated that they will. This is a big problem for Trump. In an Atlantic Council article by a guy named Peter Dickinson, he said this: Trump offered Putin a victory. I don't see how this is true. Sounds foolish to me. But Putin's refusal has left Trump no choice but a harder route, like through sanctions, right? I don't get where the victory was. What are you supposed to do? Oh, sorry, we win. We win. Now we'll retreat and give you everything back. Nobody suggested that. So the route is economic warfare, and economic wars have very great impacts, almost as much as regular war. But there are nuances. Trump administration might calibrate tariffs, maybe 100% tariffs get negotiated down to something less, or only applied to certain goods that give a chance to reduce Russian. There are exemption waivers, of course. Yahoo Finance coverage suggests that relations with China and India are at risk, just like I am saying, and the tariff threat is part of a larger negotiated dynamic with the EU. So, concurrently, Trump's pushing Europe for trade concessions. This ultimatum is entwined with a lot of things, a lot of input. European allies largely support pressuring Russia, but would balk at saying, we don't want to sanction India or China because they also trade with them in large amounts. The risk of fracturing global coalition is what Russia is banking on, and it's by forcing people to take a stand. And I don't think the U.S. has the stones anymore to hold it all together. If all you got are a-holes like Lindsey Graham, who just loves his war, I don't know. The countries in the global south are, continuing to feel that the U.S. is trampling upon their interests and everyone else's. And so for the BRICS countries, the big members, to say, listen, we want you guys to follow us, and they've said these things to these other countries that see BRICS as an alternative to the U.S. telling them what to do. So if the people don't stand up on the BRICS side, they risk losing the rest of the global south. So I think India and China will stand up and say, you want an alternative to the U.S. telling us what to do? This is it. Join BRICS. So this is an enormous economic stakes game for the old Trumpster. He's threatening a trade war on the U.S. to accompany the shooting war, all to force an end to Russia's SVO. He takes it pretty seriously, but by shortening the deadline, he wants it sooner rather than later. The implications for the dollar are mixed. In the short term, it could boost the dollar, as happens in crises. But in the long run, every country that I've mentioned has been hoarding gold. They've been getting rid of U.S. debt, refusing to buy more. So we got problems, friends and neighbors. Even U.S. allies privately worry about the overuse of sanctions because it pushes de-dollarizations. Trump's ultimatum might end the Ukraine war if it works. My bet is no on that, by the way. But it could also mark a turning point in international economic order. I think we're already there. If it drives the world into such trading blocks like BRICS, which it will. It is high risk, high reward, possibly. I don't know how it's a high reward for us to end the war in Ukraine. I don't know what we get out of it. And he's compressed it into a 10-day window. Isn't that just freaking crazy? Trump's decision to slash his ultimatum from 50 to 10 days is a product of his mounting frustration, a low battlefield victory status for Ukraine, all the allies and advisors and the deep staters beaten up on Trumpster, and a strategic calculus, I think misguided myself, that are all accelerated by the fact that Putin and Russia have been extremely steady and will not capitulate. And nobody's going to force them to. China, India, Brazil, none of them are going to do that. In fact, they're going to back them up. Officially, the U.S. position is that waiting any longer for Putin to show good faith is futile and untenable
given the bloodshed in Ukraine. Unofficially, Trump's patience is worn thin after months of stalled talks, and he thinks this might be a way to end it. Several key factors that I talked about here were the battlefield urgency, especially in Pokrovsk, which is, uh, you know, Trump wants to freeze the conflict. Let's talk about that. That has been the goal all along because they need to regroup and figure out how to uh, keep Ukrainians from dying because Ukraine is losing. I'm not saying that Russian forces aren't losing too, but far more Ukrainian are. And I don't know that it's going to change, especially if all you want is a 30-day ceasefire. Um, Trump's here's a second one. So the battlefield, we got to do something. Trump's claim of disillusionment with Putin is exactly that, only a claim. Once boasting of his great relationship with Putin, Trump now says he's disappointed and has cynicism about Putin's intentions. Putin's failure to reciprocate Trump's leniency, ignoring his 50-day olive branch and escalating strikes, made Trump shift. One, analyst said Trump offered Putin something in Ukraine, but Putin refused. Why? One suggested answer is that Putin thinks he can win. I know he thinks he can win. And by the way, he will win and prefers war, forcing Trump to acknowledge that only hard power might alter Putin's calculus. Thus, the timeline shrink is as much about his personal belief that Putin will not capitulate as it is about the situation on the ground. But I still come back to the point of why make Putin capitulate and not Zelensky. Makes no sense to me. Because people are dying, right? That's the justification. Russia is supposed to stop, but Ukraine is not. Something's weird about that. Ukrainian officials, and Yermak that talked about it. Economic leverage is allegedly a last resort. The 10-day ultimatum rests on the threat of an unprecedented sanction regime. There are perceptions and misperceptions about all of this. It's something that you really got to hear everything to fully understand it. Moscow mocks and rejects ultimatums. They're convinced that Russia will not be bent by threat, a stance that will lead to a collision if neither side blinks by the deadline. Kiev welcomes leadership of the U.S. because they can't win on their own. They say it's the only language Putin will understand. Around the world, public narrative ranged from the hope that the move will finally bring peace to a fear that it escalates the conflict into World War III. If Putin senses resolve and unity on Trump's side, he may seek to save face. I personally doubt it. But if he perceives a bluff or division, he will dig in, expecting the U.S. will flinch, which is far more likely. As of the new deadline, August 7th to 9th, all eyes are on Putin's response and Trump's next move. Will Putin test Trump's will by continuing his offensive? If so, Trump will face not Putin. Trump will face the moment of decision. Will he enforce the sweeping sanctions and tariffs, or find an excuse to extend the deadline and undermine his own ultimatum? As Medvedev said, the credibility of the U.S. power is on the line. Conversely, if by some development negotiations do start, Trump can claim victory for forcing Putin to the table. Putin said he'll go to the table all along if the goal is to end the conflict and not walk away with a 30-day ceasefire. He will not agree to a 30-day ceasefire. So Trump is in more danger than Putin. Trump has tied his prestige and legacy to ending the Ukraine war quickly, and he's lost that ability. He collapsed a timeline that originally stretched into September down to August because he sees that as a window to either achieve peace or justify dramatically increased pressure. The reduction from 50 days to 10 is more than numeric changes. It's a transformation in Trump's approach. from viewing himself as a mediator who would cajole both sides to win, which is, remember, he's the deal maker, right? Now he's an enforcer who's going to coerce Russia, force Russia to end the war on his terms, by the way, which truly isn't going to work. And how he can believe that is going to work is beyond me. But Russia won't end the war against its own well and repeatedly stated interests. Whether the approach succeeds or fails, whether the old Trumpster succeeds or fails is going to have profound consequences for Ukraine, for U.S. Russia relations, and for the global order. The next week or two will reveal if Putin yields to Trump's king of the playground strategy, or if this ultimatum becomes just another milestone in an even more dangerous phase of the conflict. For now, Trump's message is the time's almost up. The world is going to hold its breath for 10 days to see what is accomplished, in 10 days, what we couldn't accomplish in 500 days or in one day, as Trump suggested. But all of us would like an end to the carnage in Ukraine. I hope you've enjoyed the show. My name is Samuel Trapp. You can listen to me on damradio.com/live, Sunday through Thursday at 9 p.m. And you can also download all of my past podcasts at internationalflavor.com. I appreciate you being here. Have a very nice evening.